Beginning in the 1970s, several powerful psychedelic experiences played a pivotal role in my life. Then, in 2006, I discovered a psychedelic mushroom in Roslin Chapel, a Catholic church in Scotland, that was the catalyst for this entire research. Today, I'd like to share some of the findings of the Psychedelic Gospels. So I typically start a talk by asking how many people have had psychedelic experiences. I'm not going to do that at a MAPS conference, but let me ask you this. How many of you have had a difficult or very challenging psychedelic experience? You're not alone. Albert Hofman, who first experienced LSD in 1943, had a very challenging first experience. As he said, I was seized by the dreadful fear of going insane. I was taken to another time, another place, another world. Was I dying? For me, my first experience with orange sunshine at a rainbow family gathering high in the Rockies in Colorado was also a very challenging experience. I was in a very tumultuous time in my life. That was my set. And that little tab of acid spun me into a Carlos Castaneda-like world of malevolent spirits. And it was a real learning experience. I felt challenged by it. Where was my instant nirvana? Where was my numinous nirvana? Where was my instant enlightenment that Timothy Leary was promising? Nowhere to be found. But undaunted, I decided, I want to learn a lot more about psychedelics. I want to learn a lot more. And as a professor, as an anthropologist, I decided to design a course then titled Hallucinogens and Culture, which I taught at Florida International University from 1975 to 2014 when I retired there. It's still in the catalog. It may be the first 4-credit course on psychedelics in the country. In Florida. This course starts off with a discussion of what are the major landmarks in the study of hallucinogens and culture. And I'm sure some of you can come up with your own. My favorite is the miracle at Marsh Chapel, the Good Friday experiment conducted in 1962 by Walter Pankey at Marsh Chapel at Boston University. This study created an illuminated synthesis between religion and science, and it definitively proved that synthetic psilocybin could create and generate an authentic mystical experience. What happened? It was a double-blind experiment. They gave to 10 divinity students psilocybin. They gave to the other 10 divinity students niacin as a placebo. 9 out of the 10 students who received the psilocybin had a full-blown mystical experience. And one of them, Houston Smith, the eminent scholar of religion who died recently, said, "This was the most powerful cosmic homecoming I have ever experienced." Walter H. Clark, a distinguished psychologist, said, "There are no other experiments known to me in the history of the scientific study of religion better designed or clearer in their conclusions than this one." 25 years later, Rick Doblin, the founder of MAPS, did a follow-up study. 25 years later, he found 7 out of the 9 divinity students who experienced the psilocybin. And he found that for all of them, they considered this to be one of the most important and enduring experiences in their life. We believe my sense is that this is my favorite landmark study because it creates an important, significant thread in the tapestry of the history of psychedelics, uniting the ancient past with the present psychedelic renaissance. Why do I say that? I say that because I believe that this phenomena of mystical experience is a key factor, and Julie as a psychologist agrees with me, in the success of the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy that you're hearing about in many of these other sessions. Next slide. In writing about the Johns Hopkins and the NYU studies with cancer patients, the article goes on, in both trials, the intensity of the mystical experience described by patients correlated with the degree to which their depression decreased. In our book, we propose that it was this access to divinity, this portal to the divine that the mushroom images in Christian art represent, is the reason why these were enshrined in early and medieval Catholic churches. Next slide, please. Our anthropological journey of discovery begins at Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, where we were drawn by the Da Vinci Code. And in Rosslyn, which is a synthesis of pagan and Catholic imagery, I discovered a psychoactive Amanita mushroom sculpted into the forehead of Rosslyn's most prominent green man, hanging down from the ceiling in the very part of the front of the chapel. I showed this, Julie and I showed this to Paul Stamets, the eminent mycologist who is speaking here, and he said, this is a taxonomically correct Amanita muscaria. And then he laughed and he said, let me get my computer. And he pulled it out and he had photographs of this and of other mushrooms enshrined in Rosslyn. In addition, this started us thinking, well, what about other Catholic churches? What's going on in Catholicism? What about the life of Jesus? What about the disciples? And now, while our minds were on the verge of a rambunctious overthrow of reason, the words of Carl Sagan kicked in. What did he say? He said that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So if you are going to present such controversial theories about psychedelics in Christianity, you better go out and gather some extraordinary evidence. And this is what we did, next slide, traveling through chapels and cathedrals and abbeys in France and Germany and all of the places you see on the map, and looking and finding psychedelic mushrooms in stained glass windows, mosaics, illuminated Bibles, sculpture, fresco. These are the places we visited. We also went to Israel, and we couldn't get to Egypt because of the Arab Spring and the uprisings, but we saw many entheogens in the Egyptian artifacts in the museums of Paris and England. Let's go on to the next slide. This is a small church, the Church of Saint Martin de Vic, in the center of France. The outside is drab. It has a plain brown door. And when you walk inside, it's the colors, even restored from 1,000 years ago, are amazing. This is a work of genius. Walking in there was like having cataracts lifted from your eyes, which I have done, and all of a sudden seeing clearly again. And when we walked into the choir and we looked at this fresco of Jesus entering Jerusalem, riding on the ass, followed by his disciples, Julie grabbed my arm and she said, Jerry, do you see what I see? And I looked in the upper corner there and I said, oh yes, I see what you see. One of the joyful youth welcoming Jesus to Jerusalem is holding the stem of one of 5 tan, smooth, large psilocybin mushroom caps. Now, we've heard that size matters, and it certainly matters in Romanesque art. Size did matter, and the fact that these caps are so large. When we follow this painting to the next wall, it takes you to the towers of Jerusalem. And there, what is growing out of the towers of Jerusalem? Large psilocybin mushroom caps being cut down with long knives. And then we could barely believe our eyes, because this tower overlooked a painting, a fresco of the Last Supper, which is in our book, with Jesus and the disciples, with mushroom caps on the table, the long knives, and when you look very closely at the photographs in our book, mushrooms drawn very distinctively into the hem of the disciples. It was at this point that we had our aha moment, and we said, this is an alternative history of Christianity. This is different from the master story. And this started to make sense because Pope Gregory in the 6th century said, people are illiterate. Let art be the Bible. Let art be the religious instruction of the illiterate. Now we had to ask ourselves and check ourselves again. We said, well, is this a marginal Catholic cult? Is this a renegade bunch of hippie priests operating far from the crown and the church out here in the center of France? We need to go to the high holy places of Christendom. We need to go to Chartres Cathedral. We need to go to Canterbury Cathedral. We need to go to St. Michael's Church in Germany. And here's what we found. Next slide, please. This is on the cover of our book. This comes from an illuminated Bible, which is richly illustrated and decorated with gold inlaid on it. And this is from the first folio, which has 12 drawings, including from Genesis. And this is God creates plants. But as you can see here, God is actually creating psychoactive mushrooms. The Amanita muscaria mushroom, the blue psilocybin, because as we know, psilocybin turns bluish when oxidizes, and other psilocybin mushrooms that are kind of decorative, almost like holographic implants there. These have remained there, hidden in plain sight. Why hidden? Because the theologian, the art historian, the church historians don't have the background in ethnobotany or mycology to know what they're even looking at. In fact, I had one prominent art historian who wrote the commentary on the Canterbury Psalter say to me, Jerry, I wouldn't know a mushroom if I saw one. So we need a lot of education and interdisciplinary study. We went to Chartres Cathedral, which has 2 tiers of magnificent stained glass windows, 176 of them. We found distinct mushroom images in nearly 10% of the stained glass windows in Chartres Cathedral. And each one of them tells a different Bible story. This is the story of Placidus the hunter and his conversion to Saint Eustace. And you see he's surrounded by mushrooms, and you can see that this illumination is coming down through the concentric circles of light from heaven into his head and into his conversion. Let's go to St. Michael's Church in Hildesheim, Germany. This is one of the few places where we actually know who made the artwork. It is Bishop Bernward, who was the tutor of Otto III, the Holy Roman Emperor, and this Bishop Bernward was sainted by the Catholic Church. He was brilliant. He was a mathematician, a church builder, and a metallurgist, and he cast big bronze doors with mushrooms in the Garden of Eden. And this is a Christ column that he cast out of bronze. It is 13 feet high. It is almost 3 feet in diameter, and it tells the story of Jesus from his baptism by John until the entry into Jerusalem. And there are multiple scenes of psilocybin mushroom images. This is the Transfiguration, a turning point because it is one of the 2 places in the New Testament where a miracle happens to Jesus rather than him doing the miracle. And it is the first time where God intersects with humanity through Jesus, saying to the disciples who are standing there under the mushrooms, listen, this is my son, hear him well. 200 years later, the priestly descendants of Bishop Bernward created a ceiling painting 90 feet long on the whole nave of St. Michael's Church of the Jesse tree, telling the story of the lineage of Jesus all the way back through the Hebrew kings to the house of David. And at the very base of the Jesse tree is our Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, bordered by a very large red and gold Amanita cap. This is an Amanita muscaria. So we see these wherever we've gone. Can you go to the next slide? This is just the tip of the iceberg. There are dozens of color photos and black and white photos which are analyzed and explained in depth throughout our book. And I want to make it very clear at this point that we are not here to challenge anyone's belief in Christianity, but rather to reveal a secret that many of you know and that I've learned in the long study of psychedelics is integral to many of the world's religions. We believe that in religious sacraments, and we believe they should encompass all sacraments, including psychoactive plants. And we quote in our book Brother David Stendhal Rost of the Order of St. Benedict, who said, if I can experience God through a sunset on a mountaintop, why not through a mushroom prayerfully ingested? This work, this research, has given us a threefold mission. One is continued research on the psychedelic gospels. We know our findings are controversial. In the end of our book, we call for the creation of an interdisciplinary committee on the psychedelic gospels to not only evaluate the analysis that we present, but all of the other many mushroom images that are turning up in churches and cathedrals from Europe to the Middle East and into Russia. We also call for more education, and we call for legalization. I want to talk about education for a minute. Why is education so important? Because I went through a whole graduate program in anthropology at Cornell University with a minor in Latin American studies, one of the areas of the world where you find prolific use of psychedelics. And I'm not going to go through naming the different tribes, and you know ayahuasca and peyote and San Pedro and others. But I'd never heard one word about psychedelics. The students who've come to my class for 4 decades, they tell me, Dr. Brown, I've never heard 95% of what you're talking about. So there is a big stigma, there is a big taboo, there is a big loss. And I applaud the call for bringing this into academia, but it's going to be a rough road and a long haul to get courses accredited into the program. So what we have today is this fabulous tool of social media. And how many of you are with psychedelic clubs or with psychedelic societies? A number of you. And I've been invited to address a number of those clubs in DC and Austin through webinars, and I am happy to do that. And if you're interested in having me speak, please, I'll take my card at the end of this presentation. I also want to applaud Thomas Roberts, who in his book, The Psychedelic Future of the Mind, raises this issue, and he says, to be an educated person in the 21st century, we ought to have the option to explore psychedelics at some point in our life. And we have called, Julie and I, for the creation of sacred centers, religious centers, sort of what existed in Eleusis, where people could go and responsibly explore psychedelics. I also want to talk, in order for that to happen, there's going to have to be legalization. And I applaud everything that MAPS is doing wholeheartedly. But what about the rest of us who don't need PTSD, trauma and psychedelic treatment or cancer? What about the 26 million Americans who have explored LSD and other psychedelics and found they are very useful for personal growth, for creativity? Steve Jobs said, I love LSD. It was one of the most significant things in my life and helped me create Apple and helped me think differently for creativity and innovation. We believe that, and we have found in the case of the Native American Church, in the case of Santo Dime, that in the case of Santeria, that the Supreme Court has been very rigorous and very generous in its interpretation of the First Amendment, that there will be Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So we believe that legalization will be through religious use, will be an avenue that will get us there faster and will cover many, many more people. And we think that the legal wheels and the institutional syncretism between Catholicism and other religions and psychedelics, such as has happened with the church in Brazil, is an important avenue to explore. I would like to conclude by paraphrasing the final words of our book. Certainly, psychedelics have posed tremendous challenges throughout history to political and religious communities alike. With the coming of monotheism, psychedelics were suppressed as the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden. And that's our conclusion. During the Inquisition, psychedelics were demonized as the tools of Satan by the inquisitors. And during the 1960s, psychedelics were banned as dangerous drugs. Now look, It took 300 years for the Catholic Church to apologize to Galileo. We hope it won't take that long for an apology to the wise women who were burned at the stake of the Inquisition for their knowledge of medicine and herbs. It's very rare in American life that you get a second chance, and psychedelics now have a second chance to do it right and come into the mainstream. This time around, let's explore them with an open heart and an open mind. Thank you.
And for example, there's a drug called dimethyltryptamine, DMT for short. And this is a 40-minute run where your consciousness is really screwed up. And I was told about this, and I inquired of the doctors whether it was, dangerous or harmful or would leave you with the heebie-jeebies. And they said, no, it doesn't do anything like that. It's just about 40 minutes of sheer insanity. And they said it renders people speechless. Well, I said, it won't render me speechless. Oh, they said, no, you come off it. So, all right, I said, I'll bet you anything you like. Give me a tape recorder and give me this chemical, and I will tell you just exactly how it feels in a coherent way. Well, wow, they gave me the first shot, which was about 1.3 cc, and although there was a kind of vaguely interesting change, nothing much happened. So then they gave me 1.9 cc, I think, and then it came on. It was as if, say, your elbow, as a point in my field of vision, suddenly came at me, but in a spiral pattern, against the background that was spiraling the other direction. See, so you've got this sort of thing going on. And then this suddenly caught hold of my body, sucked it into the system, and twisted my body into the same spiral motion. And that everything started seeming to go like this, and it was all converted into brilliantly illuminated plastic. So that it became a cross between a toy shop and Times Square, vaguely menacing. And, you hardly knew which way up you were. And so it was difficult, but patiently I talked into the tape recorder every single thing that was going on and what it was like. Now, a lot of people would say, well, you shouldn't do that. That it destroys the experience when you talk about it. It doesn't. That's the funny thing about all these things, that they're much more interesting when you do some work with them. The work seems to throw something into the experience, and then it gives you another task back. And that all adds to the interest of the thing. And I found out that in working with these things, there was no further conflict between the intellect and the intuition. That the more you intellectualize, the more the intuitive insight sprung up to correspond to the intellectual. And so, instead of, therefore, having a session in which you just curl up and go into your own little private womb and let it take over, and you come back and all you can say is, man, it was a gas. See? So what? What's the point of going on a heroic journey and not bringing something back? The whole point, in every myth, heroes who take strange journeys must bring back a feather of the fabulous bird, a claw of the dragon, or the beheaded head of the villain that they slew, saying, see, here it is. So I always feel it's necessary in any of these adventures to bring something back. And so you get the great, intense fun, really the most stimulating thing, of saying we're going to devote this session to the study of a particular problem.
The announced topic of this meeting embarrasses me to some extent. First, because it puts me too much in the center of the event, the inauguration of a library dedicated to preserve and make available the legacy of consciousness research of the last 50 years. To this research, I made only a substantial contribution. Substantial is the true sense of this word, namely in the form of two substances, which became influential. Second, I am embarrassed because you may expect from me a survey of 50 years of research in consciousness. But this research is a domain of psychologists, psychiatrists, and philosophers. Being a chemist, I am not competent to present such a survey. What I can tell you are only my personal experiences and ideas. Precisely 50 years ago, in 1938, I synthesized a substance which had at that time, unexpected influence on my life, and which later influenced and changed the life of many others. I mean D-lysergic acid diethylamide, known as LSD-25 or just LSD. Its preparation and the discovery of its astonishing effects on the psyche have been described and published already so many times that they need not be repeated here. And in addition, you, Dr. Strittner has presented to you the whole story this evening. I am often asked what has made the deepest impression upon me in my LSD experiments, and whether I have arrived at new understandings through these experiences. Of greatest significance to me has been the insight that I attained as a fundamental understanding from all my LSD experiences that what one commonly takes as the reality by no means signifies something fixed, but rather something that is ambiguous. That there is not only one, but there are many realities, each comprising a different consciousness also of the ego. One can arrive at these insights through scientific reflection. The problem of reality is and has been from time immemorial a central concern of philosophy. There is, however, a fundamental distinction whether one approaches the problem of reality rationally or if one obtrudes upon this problem emotionally through an existential experience. The first planned LSD experience was therefore so deeply moving and alarming because everyday reality, which had until then been considered to be the only one reality, dissolved, and an unfamiliar ego experienced another unfamiliar reality. Another problem also appeared, that concerning the innermost self, which itself, unmoved, was able to record these external and internal transformations. How could those strange changes in the experience of reality be explained? Evidently, the outer, objective, material world did not change during the time I was under the influence of LSD. Therefore, something inside me and the experiencing subject must have been altered. These reflections led me to conceive reality as a product of a transmitter, the material exterior world, and the receiver, our consciousness, the inner spiritual center of a human individual. In order to describe the mechanism by which reality comes into being through the interaction of these two factors, transmitter and receiver, one can use the metaphor of TV broadcasting. Evidently, both transmitter and receiver are needed to produce a TV picture. If either of one is lacking, the TV screen will remain blank and there will be no sound. Correspondingly, if only the material world existed without conscious humans, or vice versa, no human reality would exist. Let us now examine what we know about what comprises human reality, still using the transmitter-receiver metaphor. First, what is the fundamental difference between transmitter and receiver? Whereas there is only one transmitter, one outer material world, there are as many receivers as there are human beings. And whereas the outer material world exists objectively, human consciousness is a subjective spiritual entity. All that we know objectively about the exterior world, about the transmitter, has been revealed by a scientific research. All that can be discerned objectively in the exterior world is matter and energy. Matter occurring in innumerable inorganic forms, the stars, the earth, with its oceans and mountains, with its organisms of the plant and animal kingdoms, with the products of human creativity, cities, objects of our daily life and of arts. We are surrounded with matter and are matter ourselves with our bodily existence. The science which is involved with investigation of matter is chemistry. The other component of the outer world which can be objectified is energy. Energy occurring as radiation, heat and kinetic energy. So much for the transmitter. Now, what do we know about the receiver? About human consciousness? Consciousness defies scientific definition, for it is what I need to contemplate what consciousness is. Our inability to grasp the very nature of consciousness can be illustrated by this metaphor. You can't pull yourself into the air by tugging on your own head. All attempts to define consciousness are tautological. Consciousness can only be described as the receptive and creative spiritual center of the ego, as the very core of what we call I. Consciousness remains a mystery, the very central mystery of our existence. This becomes even more evident if we examine its role as receiver in the production of reality. The antennae of the human receiver are formed by our 5 sensory organs. The antenna for optical images, the eye, is capable of receiving electromagnetic waves and projecting a picture onto the retina that coincides with the object from which those waves emanate. It is important to realize that the human eye can only receive a very small band of the immeasurable spectrum of electromagnetic waves traveling through the universe, namely only waves measuring 0.4 to 0.7 thousandth millimeter. Within this small section, our eyes and the receiver, our consciousness, are capable of differentiating between different wavelengths and recording them as different colors. In connection with our reflections on reality, it is important to note that colors do not exist in the exterior world. Most of are not aware of this basic fact, even though it can be looked up in every textbook on physiology. All that actually objectively exists in the outer world is matter transmitting energy, transmitting electromagnetic oscillations of varying wavelengths. If an object reflects or transmits electromagnetic waves with a length of 0.4 thousandths of a millimeter, then we say that it is blue. If it transmits waves with a length of 0.7 thousandths millimeter, we describe the object as being red. This means that the perception of color is a purely psychological and subjective event taking place in the inner space of an individual. The brightly colored world as we see it does not exist on the outside. It exists only on the screen inside every individual of every individual. Regarding the acoustic world, there is a similar relationship between transmitter and receiver. The antenna for acoustic signals, the ear, displays a similar limited breadth of reception in its function as part of the receiver. And like colors, sounds do not exist objectively. What does exist objectively are once again waves, wave-like compressions and expansions of the air, which are received by the ear, registered by the tympanic membrane, and transformed into the sensation of sound in the hearing center of the brain. Also the other aspects of reality, which are made accessible by the remaining 3 senses, those of taste, smell, and touch, are created by the interaction of transmitters in the outer world and receivers in the inner world. Just like sound and colors, touch, smell, and taste don't exist objectively. They too represent purely subjective phenomena, occurring only in the inner space of individual humans. The metaphor of reality as the product of transmitter and receiver clearly illustrates that the seemingly objective picture of the world surrounding us, that which we call reality, is actually a subjective picture. This basic fact signifies that the screen is not outside but inside of every human being. We all carry inside our own personal image of reality, created by our own private receiver. Understanding reality as a product of transmitter and receiver takes on an especially important meaning which could existentially alter our daily life when we consider the part that each receiver, each individual human plays in the role of the formation of reality. We become fully aware of the world-creating power vested in every human being. Our understanding makes us aware of the fact that each individual is the creator of his or her own world. For it is in each individual mind and only there that the world and the abundance of life it contains, that the stars and the sky become real, become human reality, Our real, true freedom and responsibility is formed in our ability to create our own individual world. Once I have recognized what part of reality is objectively on the outside and what is subjectively taking place within myself, then I am more aware of what I can change in my life, where I have a choice, and thus what I am responsible for. Conversely, I become aware what is beyond my willpower and has to be accepted as an unalterable fact. This clarification of my potential and my responsibility can be of invaluable help. I have the ability to choose what I want to receive from the endless infinite program of the great transmitter from creation. That means that I can let those aspects of creation of the cosmos that make me happy enter into my consciousness and thus imbue them with reality. Or I can let in other aspects, those that depress me. It is I who creates the bright and the dark picture of the world. It is I who invests the objects that are only shaped matter in the outer world, not only with their color, but with my affection and my love, also with their meaning. This applies not only to my inanimate surroundings, but also to the living beings, to the plants, the animals, and to my fellow humans. With this insight, the full creative power of love becomes evident. Just as I am the receiver for messages from my fellow man, I am in turn a transmitter for him. Since I am materially located in his outer world, I can only convey my messages, my desires, even if they are purely spiritual, an idea, or my love, only through that what characterizes the transmitter, namely via matter and energy. Understanding expressed by a glance or a light touch. Even this can only be conveyed by material fingers, material eyes, by the material bodies of a living couple. This shows that communication would not be possible without matter and energy. The transmit-receiver metaphor for reality reveals another basic fact, the fact that reality is not a fixed state. Rather, it is the result of a continuous input of material and energetic signals from the outer world and their continuous decoding and transformation into inner conscious experience, This demonstrates that the reality is a dynamic process, being created anew at each moment. Actual reality exists in the here and now, in the moment. This explains why a child living in the given moment much more
Do you think any of us will look back in our lives and regret the things we didn't buy?
Or the places we didn't go?
Extensively than an adult perceives a real image of the world. It lives in a world permeated with more reality, more truth than that of the adult. To experience true reality in the moment is one of the main concerns of mysticism. That is where childlike and mystical experience meet. If reality were not the result of continuous changes, but a stationary condition, there would not be no experience of the moment. There would not be even any time. Since the sensation of time is only possible through the perception of change, the dynamic character of reality creates time. The transmitter-receiver concept of reality also imparts an insight into the essence of time. This metaphor of reality would appear to correspond to a dualistic concept of the world. External space, internal space, objective transmitter, subjective receiver. But reality, everyday reality, can be experienced and imagined only as a totality of transmitter and receiver. There would be no picture or sound on the TV screen if either one were missing. This example makes it evident that transmitter and receiver are nothing other than constructs of our intellect, useful, valuable, even necessary means for a rational understanding of the mechanisms by which human reality exists. Dualism is but a construct of our intelligence, which leads us to believe that the so-called objective exterior world stands in opposition to our inner subjective spiritual world. The failure to grasp that there is no dualism is one of the main reasons, if not the main reason, for the tragic, catastrophic developments in our world. This dualistic worldview, so dominant in Western culture today, has its roots in Greek pre-Socratic philosophy and in the Judeo-Christian belief, makes earth your servant. The experience of the world as matter, as an object to which man stands opposed, provided the philosophical basis for the development of modern natural sciences and technology. With this science and technology, man has changed the world, has subdued nature. Its wealth has been exploited in a manner that may be characterized as plundering, and the sublime accomplishment of technological civilization, the comfort of Western industrial society, stands face to face with the catastrophic destruction of the environment. Our objective intellect has progressed even to the heart of the matter, to the nucleus of the atom and its splitting, and has unleashed energies that threaten all life on our planet. This misuse of this knowledge could not have emerged from a consciousness of reality in which human beings perceive themselves as an integral part of living nature and the universe. All of today's attempt to make amends for the damage by adopting environmentally protective measures will remain futile or superficial patchwork if no change of the dualistic worldview ensues, until it is replaced by an existential experience of a deeper reality. The experience of such all-encompassing reality is impeded in an environment rendered dead by human hands, such as we find in our great cities and industrial districts. Here the contrast between self and outer world becomes especially evident. It is these sensations that impress themselves on everyday consciousness in Western industrial society and everywhere where technological civilization extends. It is also these morbid sensations that strongly influence modern art and literature. In a natural environment, there is less danger that a split reality experience will arise. In field and forest, and in the animal world shelters therein, indeed in every garden, a reality is perceptible that is infinitely more real, older, deeper, and more wondrous than everything made by man. A reality that will endure long after the inanimate, mechanical, and concrete world has vanished, become rusted, and fallen into ruin. In the sprouting, growth, blooming, fruiting, death and regeneration of plants, in their relationship with the sun, whose light they are able to convert into chemically bound energy in the form of organic compounds, out of which all that lives on our earth is built. In the being of plants, the mysterious, inexhaustible, eternal life energy is evident, the same that has brought us forth and takes us back into its womb, and in which we are sheltered and united with all living things. We are not leading to a sentimental enthusiasm for nature, to retrouver la nature in Jacques Rousseau's sense. That romantic movement which sought the idyllic in nature, which can also be understood as a reaction to humankind feeling of separation from nature. What is needed today is a fundamental existential experience of the oneness of all living things, of an all-encompassing reality. But this happens less and less as the primordial flora and fauna of Mother Earth must yield to a dead technological environment. The experience of reality as the ego opposed to the outer world had already begun to form itself during Greek antiquity, as I mentioned before. No doubt, at that time people already knew the suffering connected with the dualistic consciousness of reality. The Greek genius tried to cure these diseases by supplementing the objective Apollonian worldview with the Dionysian world of experience, in which the split was abolished in ecstatic inebriation. It is remarkable what the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about this in his book Die Geburt der Tragödie, The Birth of Tragedy. We can read there. It is either through the influence of narcotic potions, of which all primitive peoples and races speaks in hymns, or through the powerful approach of spring, penetrating with joy all of nature, that those Dionysian stirrings arise, which in their intensification leads the individual to forget himself completely. Not only does the bond between man and man become to be forged once again by the magic of the Dionysian rite, but alienated, hostile, and subjugated nature again celebrates her reconciliation with her prodigal son, with man. So far, Nietzsche. The Dionysian cult was closely connected with the mysteries of Eleusis, the most important mysteries of the antique world, which were celebrated annually in the fall over a span of about 2,000 years. These mysteries were established by the goddess of agriculture and grain, Demeter, as thanks for the recovery of her daughter Persephone, whom Hades, the god of the underworld, had abducted. A further offering of thanks was the ear of grain, which was presented to Triptolemus, the first high priest of Eleusis. The cultivation of grain was then disseminated over the whole world. Persephone, however, was not allowed to always remain with her mother. She had to return for a part of the year to the underworld. During this time it was winter on earth. The plants died and withdrew into the ground, only to awaken to new life early in the year with Persephone's journey back to earth. The myth of Demeter, Persephone and Hades formed, however, only the external framework for the events as the mysteries. The climax of the ceremonies began with a procession from Athens to Eleusis, lasting several days, was a concluding ceremony of initiation. The initiates were forbidden by penalty of death to divulge what they had learned and beheld in the innermost holiest chamber of the temple, the Peristerium. Not one of the multitude that were initiated ever divulged. Pausanias, Plato, Roman emperors like Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius, and many others known figures of antiquity were part to this initiation. It must have been an illumination, a visionary glimpse of a deeper reality, an insight into the true basis of the universe. We can deduce this from the initiate's own statements about the value and the importance of the vision. For example, it is reported in a Homeric hymn, "Blissful is among men on earth who has beheld that. He who has not been initiated into the holy mysteries remains a corpse in gloomy darkness." Pindar speaks of the Eleusinian benediction with the following words: "Blissful is he who, after having beheld this, enters on the way beneath the earth. He knows the end of life, as well as its divinely granted beginning." Cicero, also famous initiate, said about the splendor that fell upon his life from Eleusis, "Not only have we received the reason there that we may live in joy, but also besides that we may die with better hopes." How could the mythological representation of such an obvious occurrence, which runs its course annually before our eyes, the seed grain that is dropped into the earth, dies there, prove to be such a deep, comforting experience as that attested by the cited reports? It is traditional knowledge that the initiates were furnished with a potion, the kykeon, for the final ceremony. It is also known that barley extract and mint were ingredients of the kykeon. Scholars of mythology, like Carl Kereni, are of the opinion that the kykeon was mixed with a hallucinogenic drug. I was associated with Kereni in the 60s, doing research on this mysterious potion, an investigation as to what kind of hallucinogen could have been contained in the kykeon. A reference of this collaboration is made in Kereni's book Eleusis, which was published 1977 in New York. And it is from that text that the preceding statements on the Eleusinian mysteries were taken. Later in the 70s, I was again engaged in the investigation of the hallucinogen in the kykeon. This time I worked in collaboration with Gordon Wasson, the famous ethnomycologist with whom I had worked in the research on Mexican plants, the psilocybe mushroom and Dualitree, and Carl Ruck, professor at Boston University, who was a classical scholar specialized in Greek ethnobotany. We published the results of our studies in the book entitled The Road to Eleusis, which was published in 1978. In that publication, we put forth the hypothesis that the kykeon's effect could have been due to an LSD-like preparation of ergot. From investigations in the Sandoz research laboratories on all the various species of ergot fungus, I knew that ergot growing on the wild grass Paspalum distichum, which is widespread in the Mediterranean region, contains the same alkaloids that we had found in the ancient Mexican drug Dualitree, namely lysergic acid amide and lysergic acid hydroxyamide, closely related to lysergic acid diacyllamide, to LSD. The high priest of Eleusis had access to this hallucinogen just in front of the temple. They just had to collect the infected grains of pus ballontisticum, growing there, grind them, and put the powder into the kykeon in order to have a perfect hallucinogenic potion. If they really did so, of course, must remain a hypothesis, but the hypothesis with a high degree of probability, and Demeter was the goddess of grain. The cultural historical meaning of the mysteries of Eleusis, their influence on European intellectual and spiritual history can scarcely be overestimated. The hallucinogen of the kykeon may link these mysteries with the role of LSD in our time. What we urgently need now is evidently the same as was already needed during antiquity, namely to be freed from an experience of reality in which the individual feels himself to be separate from the outer world. We need to be healed from a dualism which had and still has such catastrophic consequences as expounded in the preceding reflections. Insights into the essence of reality, which I tried to provide using the transmitter-receiver metaphor, could help us to overcome this dualistic worldview. However, insights that are solely the result of rational reflections are not effective enough to become decisive factors in our lives. Only when accompanied by an existential, emotional experience do they grow strong enough to be able to influence and alter our view of life. Such an emotional confirmation of an insight, of a truth, can be achieved through meditation. I see the true importance of LSD, the kykeon of our time, in its ability to provide a pharmacological aid to meditation, aimed at the experience of a deeper, all-encompassing reality, a reality in which the outer material and the inner spiritual worlds, transmitter and receiver, are experienced